This is a Ford Focus ST MK3. Okay, 3.5 if you want to get fussy. Either way, it's the fantastic hot hatch that you can use every single day. If you're planning on buying one though, do yourself a favour, watch this video because I'm going to cover all the common faults and help you get a good car. Let's go. So when it comes to the engine, two options. We could either get the 2-litre petrol-powered car or we could get the diesel power plant. It's really up to you. They were both good engines, both had merits and downfalls. The important thing here is no matter what one you're looking at, this guide will be relevant because we're going to cover both. This particular car is a diesel. However, let's kick off with a 2-litre petrol engine. As you start to look at these cars, I'm certain you've already noticed when you get into the research, there's a lot of horror stories out there about pistons with holes in them, cylinder problems, ringland failures. There's a lot of stuff out there. However, I'm here to tell you, don't panic. The failure rate is nowhere near as high as you think it is. When we compare the amount of these petrol engines made to the amount that have failed, it's really quite a tiny percentage. Why are these engine failures occurring, even if it is just a tiny percentage? Well, again, as you get into the research, an acronym you're definitely going to come across is LSPI. Now, what that refers to is the low speed pre-ignition. Essentially, a belief that flooring the throttle at lower RPMs puts undue stress onto the engine and eventually leads to failure. Now, it's feasible. However, what I would say, rather than pass opinion, is that out of all the engines I've come across, researched or seen, there's been barely one that's had that as the root cause. So what does cause the engine failure? Well, sometimes, unfortunately, it's just sheer bad luck. There's nothing you can do about it, even on standard engines. Now, on that note, there is one common denominator that always seems to apply when these engine failures occur, and that is performance mods have been put on the car. Now, don't jump on me. I'm not anti-performance mod whatsoever. What I am is anti-cheap performance mod. So if you look at one of these cars and there's lots of eBay performance bits on and maybe an unknown tuner has added a remap to the engine, I'd be inclined to walk away from that. However, reputable branded parts with a reputable, well-known, established dealer is a totally different story. Now, when it comes to the diesels, a much simpler affair. Owners report next to no problems with these engines. It is really solid, so really you don't have anything to worry about. Now, before we move away from this front end, we're finished with the engine, but one thing to note, these DRL units can tend to go wrong. What happens is they don't fail altogether, they tend more to flicker. Now, Ford did issue a software update, but it doesn't always fix it. So make sure you test these DRLs, make sure they stay on and steady so you don't get hit with that problem. So when it comes to bodywork, thankfully, nothing too bad to highlight here. It is just a case of wanting to have a good general look over the car, and thankfully, the way that Ford built these, everything is really quite accurate, so spotting things like crash damage is quite easy. Now, it's definitely a car we want to do that on, as I say, because it tends to be driven a wee bit more enthusiastically than your average car. The only thing to note, and this is just like the Mark II Focuses, is the rear bumper can tend to rub on the rear quarter panel, and that can cause it to corrode. So careful with that one. Now, when it comes to the wheels, we can suffer a little bit with corrosion. Now, specifically, there's two places around the nuts, because they've got covers on them, that can trap moisture, and then it can be difficult to try and get your socket on them. Secondly, around the valve itself can tend to corrode, and the seal on the valve can have problems as well. So you want to make sure the tyre isn't deflating or losing pressure. And that's going to be tricky when you view a car at first, but it's well worth being aware of, and certainly if you notice any visual defects, make sure you bring that into the bargain, save yourself a bit of money. For this next problem, you definitely don't want to miss it. We'll get onto that in just a moment, but first up, a favour from you guys. Now, we're waging war against dodgy sellers that try and sell you bad cars with faults covered up. Now, if you want to join us in that fight, the best way you can do it is by hitting that subscribe button. Also, if you're getting value in this content, go ahead and hit the like button as well. If you want to follow the owner of this car, this is her Instagram name here with a little underscore. So give her a follow. Next up, bit of a weird one on such a modern car, but it can tend to be a bit leaky. not with fluid coming out, but getting in. So first up, check the door seals aren't too perished, and also have a feel of the carpets around about the bottom of the door. Headlights as well can also be, they can also be leaky. There was actually an official Ford bulletin wherein Ford would fit a vent to them and stop them condensating up so bad. And yes, this floor is very slippy. And final place for water getting in is into the boot. So have a quick check in here, make sure you look under the carpet as well. Hopping into this interior, it still feels really fresh, especially compared to my old Mark II Focus ST that I've got, which, by the way, if you want to see a bit more about, there's a link in the description below. But don't click it yet, finish this video first. So there was 3 different levels of spec that you could get these STs in: ST1, ST2, ST3. Now, I'm not going to bother going through everything that you got in the spec, but I will put it on screen now. Did you get that? If not, go back and pause it. Thankfully, there's nothing really to mention in here that you need to check specifically. Obviously, it's prudent to just have a play with some of the controls, make sure the aircon is blown cold, make sure the windows go up and down, all the usual stuff that I'm sure you guys are already aware of. Now, one thing I do need to highlight, however, is a problem with this. Now, it's not a problem as such, but thieves love the keyless go system on these cars. What happens is they'll either copy the signal from the key or amplify the signal, and the car thinks the key's present, can start it up and drive away. Now, for these final checks, we need to hit the road, so let's go. Out on that test drive, hopefully you've got better weather than we've got in wintry Scotland at the minute. It wouldn't be hard. But as we get that car up to temperature, listen out to all those suspension components. Again, we don't want to go buying a car, then realising there's warm bushings and things for us to do right off the bat. So while it gets up to temp, this is a really good opportunity to have a feel of the car and also listen if there's anything sounding a little bit loose. Alright, so now we've got the car up to temperature, we want to drop a gear, give it a bit of stick and make sure it's nice and responsive. As I said, this is a diesel car and it really does feel good. It'll push you into the seat, loads of torque there, and if that's not the case with the car you're driving, there may be a problem. Now, what that would lead me to is there is a hose on these diesel cars that runs from the turbo to the intercooler that's known to split. That would be the first place to look if it does feel a bit down on power. Alright, so next up for this problem, you need to pull over. It relates to the wiring loom on the car, and the way to spot this problem is by coming to a stop, dipping the clutch and making sure the revs don't drop and try and surge back up again. Also, turn the steering full lock to the right. That's the worst case for it to short out. The wiring loom rubs on the gearbox, and when it does, these are the 2 things that tend to cause problems. So watch out for that one. So for the next thing to tell you about, not an awful lot we can do about this if you do happen to uncover it on the car that you're driving and looking to buy, but it's a creaking windscreen. Now, I believe there was something Ford could do with the fitment to help take care of that, but again, something you want to be aware of and maybe bring it into the bargain when it comes to negotiation time. Now, the final problem to mention is a safety recall. Now, this mostly applied to 2017 cars, and it was to do with the side and knee airbags. Essentially, if you had a big crash, they wouldn't go off. So Ford sent out the bulletin, they got the safety recall done, and yeah, hopefully you're not uncovering that on your test drive or something's went really wrong. And there we go, guys, just like that, you've got all the tips you need to go off and find yourself a brilliant Ford Focus ST. If you've got any questions, drop it in the comments below, but for now, we're off to have some fun.